Thanks very much, Lashkan Corda, for the opportunity to speak on this legislation. Well, I wonder maybe should we be thankful for the opportunity to speak on it, because it's been such a rushed job to get through here. And I would first like to take this opportunity and actually to condemn the way the government has made a complete farce of the legislative process this week. We have had a committee that was forced to suspend yesterday after discovering that the deadline for opposition amendments had passed before the committee even ended its pre-legislative scrutiny of the bill. In the Shannon, Government Guillotine Committee stage of the Circular Economy Bill without giving senators the opportunity to debate the amendments they had submitted. And in the Dáil yesterday evening, we took second stage of the MICA Bill, despite the fact that the deadline for amendments was earlier that day. And we were only made aware on Monday that we would sit today and discuss 3 government bills that had not yet even been published at that stage. So not only does that put incredible stress on the Bills Office and the Oireachtas staff, it makes a joke of the whole process when legislation is treated this way and when we don't properly and fully engage with all the legislative stages. It takes away the opportunity for proper scrutiny, which is a fundamental role of opposition TDs, and maybe that's the reason why it's all been rushed through and that this deadline has been used. Opposition TDs were willing to cancel our constituency appointments and sit later or longer, but not giving us the opportunity to scrutinise all of this legislation being rammed through is not acceptable, and it happens every year. It shows complete contempt, I believe, for the parliamentary process.
It's important from that point of view of the House. The House doesn't always spend its time wisely. There are many delays in between. This is important because the message goes out from here, and along you're referring to at the moment. It is not the fault of the House. The House provides the accommodation to move legislation forward when it should be moved forward in the interests of the state, and the balance between debate and the movement of legislation, which may not always be one and the same thing, needs to be recognised. And that's, from my experience in this House, that we can spend all the time we want wasting time, and all the really urgent stuff can be pushed to one side. And I don't think it's a good thing, and I know that the government is aware of this too, and I know that the opposition need to be aware of it as well.
That's a very interesting intervention you made there, Keeler, but I don't think I said it was a responsibility of this House in relation to any of this. I think what I clearly said was it's a responsibility of the government, and it's the government that is treating the House contemptuously in this process. Sorry?
We were in here until midnight the other night play acting.
Yeah, that took
total waste of time.
That took about 40 minutes of the whole time. There's 168 hours in a week.
2 hours and a bit.
And look, I will happily have this discussion with you at some point at a different stage in a different bill. Again. And because what you're saying is completely spurious and it's ridiculous. What is actually happening here is that the government is treating this House with contempt. And that is the situation, and that's what we're talking about. You've intervened in this debate. You've intervened in this debate where you had no call to intervene in it. And I'm not going to... What?
Just a minute. I happen to be in the chair. And I think the message that goes out from this House at all times is what prevails and what happens in the House. And the public outside gets the message. Now, I have to bring to your attention that it's all very fine to blame government in our opposition in the course of debate. But the purpose of this discussion here is not to blame government or opposition, either one. The purpose is to address the content of the bills. Very important bills, 3 important... Oh, I'm sorry. You may think that's funny, but it isn't funny. And you know that from your own constituency work. So could we deal with the bills and the important bills that are before the House? Have been spoken by several people, and you very graciously were available to speak in the House on the bill. And could I ask you, bills, well, wide bill, to come and please.
Well, maybe could I ask for some of your divine wisdom and actually advise me as how I can conduct myself in this debate? And can I not give a discussion and talking about the bill in relation to the context of how we've arrived here and how the process comes on? That's not allowed.
We're supposed to talk about the bill.
So are you going to be very clear on that and everything that you do?
There's no use spending time, wasting time, and at the same time blaming the House for not facilitating you.
Well, when did I waste time? Point out when I wasted time.
You didn't up to now.
When did I waste time? Point out when I wasted time.
Look, Look,
I think you're making
normally
accusations
very
there that are
astute
completely wrong and
and
unfounded.
very responsible.
When did I waste time?
No.
When did I waste time?
Hold on a second. Would members refuse resume their seats?
I would suggest the member should make his contribution without interruption.
Well, he can make his contribution without interruption, but he now in speaking and everybody else can make their contribution, but they just cannot wander around the whole country in the making of it. That's
Second
long
stage.
as
Where did I wander around the whole country? Where did I wander around the whole country?
In passing, you can do it. I'm surprised at you, Deputy. You're normally a very responsible guy. You're normally a very responsible guy. So please proceed on the bill.
Okay, here, look, I'm glad to think that you're disappointed in me and that you don't see me as responsible, because I think that's a good measure of it. So now we can get on to the actual bill itself after that intervention. So regarding the Civil Law Miscellaneous Provisions Bill, I support that this bill aims to give further scrutiny to those settled here under the Temporary Protection Directive. But you'd have to ask why this bill is actually urgently needed to come in the week before the adjournment and to be set on a Friday. Is that okay to ask? Is that okay?
It's in passing. That's
okay.
correct.
Fair play to you. Thanks for giving me the direction anyway. So, you'd have to wonder why that is, and it's obviously like none of these provisions have been new or are newly foisted on the government or anything like that. The issues that have been addressed in this have been around for a long time since the Ukrainian crisis arose, and indeed the Stardust, unfortunately, has been around for an awful lot longer. So this bill could have come in a timely fashion. This bill could have come in that it could have been discussed during the normal times that we're here. Instead of us taking statements for weeks on end, this bill could have actually been done there. And you'd have to wonder why. It's waited until the jaws of the summer recess that it's actually foisted upon us then and say we have to rush it through. So, and look, it is great to see so many Ukrainian people settled here within our communities. And I know many communities, like my own in Killybegs, have done all they can to make them feel welcome and safe in their temporary home, and that's vitally important. Fleeing war is an incredibly traumatic experience, and we must do all we can to ensure that these people are supported fully. In order to do this, it's important that those living here under this Temporary Protection Directive have all the tools and supports necessary to fully participate in our society. And it would also, I think it's important to say as well that unfortunately, in some cases, the Ukrainians are being taken advantage of as well by unscrupulous employers and stuff like that there as well. And I think that what needs to be made available to them, and maybe there I'm looking at it to see, but what needs to be made available to them as well is all the access to the protections that they require to ensure that this doesn't happen. But unfortunately, in every situation we get, this is what we get in our societies. I would like to again reiterate my call to extend this directive not only to Ukrainians but to all those living in Ukraine. Citizenship shouldn't matter when you're fleeing a war and seeking protection. Indeed, I believe we should extend the directive even further and implement its provisions in response to various other humanitarian crises as well. Everyone deserves safe and humane living conditions, no matter what their citizenship or which country they're fleeing from. And I think one of the most depressing things in the whole Ukrainian situation was the fact that citizens of other countries who actually were living and working in Ukraine were refused entry to the European Union, and indeed were refused entry to Ireland as well, because they were non-Ukrainian citizens. And you'd have to say, sadly, that's because they weren't white and they happened to be living in Ukraine. They suffered the consequences of the war as much as any Ukrainian citizen did and had to leave. And I've had cases, and I've in one particular case where the brother, someone whose brother was living here and working in Ireland and would have been able to look after them and take them in, but they were refused entry because they weren't Ukrainian. And I think that's wrong as well. And I think that's something that we have to look at and we have to address in the future. I'm heartened by the response of so many in this country who opened their homes to Ukrainians fleeing the war. They have demonstrated the kindness of Irish people, and I know that if given the opportunity, they would happily open their homes to others fleeing war again. I'm glad that this bill proposes to give them a monthly contribution of €400. We should do all we can to support Irish families in their effort to support Ukrainian families. I would like to point out that although I am glad that Part 4 of this bill is taking the opportunity to do so now, I am disappointed that it has taken this particular crisis to address long-standing issues within our immigration system. Allowing for registration with immigration authorities throughout the country rather than Dublin only will make a huge difference, particularly to immigrants in my constituency of Donegal, where this is a huge barrier. And I'm hoping that it will be available to all immigrants rather than just Ukrainian immigrants as well. I also support that this bill proposes the appointment of more registration officers and the introduction of an online registration process. Online registration for those engaging with the immigration process should have been introduced a long time ago. It would make registration much more accessible and would significantly help with the language barrier experienced by many when engaging with the immigration process. In the explanatory memorandum for this bill, it is stated that in response to the Ukrainian crisis, a number of legislative gaps were identified. I don't believe that these gaps were only identified following the Ukrainian crisis. We have a long known of the gaps in the system. There just sadly hasn't been any will to address or close them previous to now. I do have data protection concerns with Part 5 of this bill, and I don't see why so much of the documentation is required. I also don't believe that, that 7 days is sufficient to produce such documentation, and I hope that the Minister looks into extending this to 30 days instead. Lastly, I would like to fully support that this bill makes special provisions for the impanelling and summoning of a jury of the Stardust inquest. And like other speakers here in the House tonight, I was around the same age as the people who died in the Stardust when the Stardust happened. Well, slightly younger, I'll have to say, but it's shocking that it's taken this long to resolve the issues and go through the Stardust process. And for those people, families that have suffered so much, to have to wait so long to get to deal with the issues. And I hope that this will remove the last barrier to ensuring that they can have the full process that they deserve. Because I think it's something that impacted on everybody, and it impacted on everybody in the state, and to have to wait so long to get it resolved is very difficult. I know that 14 pre-hearing meetings have already been held, but still no jury hearings have taken place. I support that amendments to the current legislation will ensure that a person impanelled to an inquest hearing will continue to be paid by their employer for the duration of the inquest, since this is a standard procedure for jury trials in the court system as well. We must ensure that the jury selection is completely transparent and that the inquest proceeds as planned in September to ensure that no more pain is inflicted on Stardust families who have been fighting for the truth for over 4 decades. Thanks very much, Ciara.